Last week I processed the shells from my eggs for breakfast into calcium acetate, which is a bioavailable calcium-based fertilizer. I'm going to show you guys how I did it. The first step was to actually remove this membrane from the eggshell. The first time I actually attempted to make this fertilizer, I read online that eggs had possessed about a 1.6% water content, which I had measured it to be about 3 to 4% the first time I did this, which I surmised came from the membrane of the eggshell. But you have to remember, there's also a lot of different chemistry going on from the successive heatings, and some of that weight change actually may be from oxidation of the membrane itself, which is not what I want. This also led to complications when I was grinding it into a fine powder, so I found removing the membrane was the best way to go. Once I removed all the membrane from the eggshells, I was able to grind them into a nice fine powder that I was satisfied with. Once ground into a fine powder, I was able to use some stoichiometry to figure out about how much acetic acid I needed to react it with. Of course, the amount doesn't really need to be stoichiometrically exact, it just needs to be in excess. Once it seemed like the reaction was no longer producing CO2, I was able to proceed and filter this. Now, you know I'm not a very patient person, and we don't have actual vacuums for Buchner filtration, so I went ahead and just pressurized it with a glove. I'm left with a nice calcium acetate solution, and of course the eggshells that got filtered out. I began to concentrate the solution, however, the Erlenmeyer flask was not the right choice, so I switched it up to a beaker the next day, and it was cooking. Continued concentrating it until it was a nice powder, and then I kept concentrating it. And if you've ever done chemistry, this is just how it goes. We got to remove all that water, and even when it looks like it's a dry powder, the mole percentage of water is probably still 50%. Finally got to a nice dry powder consistency, and this is what I was happy with calling my final product. A nice bioavailable calcium-based fertilizer for my plants.